Did the Prime Minister's demeanour in his interview today suggest studied contrition, or, as some have interpreted, was it a performance of a man who was not waving but drowning? It's the first time since Prime Minister's questions last Wednesday that he has faced a journalist. And in a pooled interview, he repeatedly told Sky's political editor Beth Rigby that he was not warned about the May 20th Downing Street BYOB party or work event. That directly contradicted Dominic Cummings' account of matters. But Mr Johnson declined to call his former chief advisor a liar. And when he was repeatedly asked whether he would resign if he was found to have misled Parliament, he repeatedly refused to answer. Both men are giving their diametrically opposed accounts to Sue Gray. And tonight, confirmation of another letter of no confidence in the Prime Minister to the 1922 committee, making 7 in all that are publicly known, and whispers of a growing tally of MPs prepared to make a move. Tomorrow is Prime Minister's questions all over again. I'm joined by our political editor, Nick Watt. Nick, what is the latest that's been happening tonight?
Well, Kirsty, yesterday we were saying there's a bit of a lull in the storm. Well, today there was a squall. It is a dangerous squall for Boris Johnson, and tonight he is in a very precarious position. Now, you remember last week I was saying that the men in grey suits, the men and women in grey suits, are the senior figures on the 1922 executive, that they were saying the decisive moment would come if those MPs elected in 2019, they're the so-called 2019ers, decided to move against Boris Johnson. Well, that appears to be happening. They held 2 meetings today, another meeting more informally at the Carlton Club tonight. That was just a dinner pre-arranged, and then another meeting tomorrow, I'm told. And it looks around about 20, possibly more, of their numbers are willing to put in those letters to Sir Graham Brady that would trigger a confidence vote in the Prime Minister. But just in a sign of how febrile this atmosphere is, at the Carlton Club tonight, some of them were meeting Will Wragg. He's a member of that 22 executive who has put in one of those letters. They claimed that they were being spied on by a special advisor to Dean Doris, and then the Culture Secretary, and they say then there was an overreaction by that side. They had a meeting, these 2019ers, this afternoon. They say that a government whip, put a member of staff outside that meeting, took their names, took their details of who was there, and then they leaked it. Now, I was talking to one senior Tory. They think that we are going to reach the threshold for those 54 letters either tomorrow, Thursday or Monday. The balloon is going up, I was told. It is important to say that the Boris Johnson side are absolutely convinced that that won't happen and that he will ride the Sue Gray report out.
So there's been a lot of comment about his demeanour today in his interview. What did you make of it?
Yes, well, so Boris Johnson has been reducing his close contacts because obviously a member of his close family tested positive for COVID. He was out and about today. He was questioned, as you saw there, by Beth Rigby, our colleague over at Sky News, about that report in the Daily Telegraph last week that whilst the Queen was preparing for the funeral of her husband, the Duke of Edinburgh, there was a party in Downing Street, a drunken party. And obviously you had that picture of Her Majesty in St George's Chapel the following day on her own, punctiliously observing the COVID rules the night before there was a party in Number 10. So let's just listen to quite a bit of that exchange.
This is the first time we've seen you since reports emerged in the Daily Telegraph, not denied by Downing Street, about 2 boozy parties held in the garden, in the buildings of Number 10, the night before Prince Philip's funeral when the country was in national mourning. Was having to apologise to the Queen about those parties the night before she put her husband of over 70 years, she laid him to rest. Was that a moment of shame for you?
I deeply and bitterly regret that happened, and I can only and renew my apologies both to Her Majesty and to the country for misjudgments that were made and for which I take full responsibility.
Now, I was talking to one senior Conservative MP who is a big fan of Boris Johnson. This is somebody who is out there defending him at the moment and thinks he'll be safe. They said they listened to that, they watched that with the sound down, and they said that looked like a broken man. A broken man or a Prime Minister showing remorse, knowing that he must do so because it is involving Her Majesty the Queen. Now, interestingly, a key figure in all of this is Rishi Sunak, seen obviously as a candidate if there is going to be a vacancy. His support appeared to be a little bit lukewarm for the Prime Minister last week, and today he was asked about what the Prime Minister has been saying last week in Parliament.
Well, the Prime Minister addressed this last week in Parliament and set out his understanding of the situation. I'd refer you to his words.
Do you believe the Prime Minister?
Of course I do. The Prime Minister
you believe
set
he's
out...
telling the truth?
Of course I do.
If the Prime Minister lied and lied to Parliament, he should resign, shouldn't he?
Well, I'm not going to get into hypotheticals. The ministerial code is clear on these matters, but as you know, Sue Gray is conducting an inquiry into the situation. I think it's right that we allow her to conclude that job.
And you support
you
support the Prime Minister unequivocally? Your microphone.
Oh, gosh, thank you.
So, a walkout by the Chancellor, but tell me more about this operation to save Boris Johnson.
Yes, now there is quite an operation to save Boris Johnson. As I understand it, he realised over the weekend that his position was becoming very difficult because of the position of those 29er MPs. Also, it's been made pretty clear to him that the problem that he has is that the voluntary wing of the party, that's the association officers, the patrons of associations, they are turning against him and saying it's time to go. You'd normally expect them to stand by a leader till the bitter end. But what's interesting about this operation is that MPs are saying it's not being done by the official whips, government whips, it's being done by a shadow whips operation. It's ministers who are loyal to him. It's ex-whips who are loyal to him. I was speaking to one minister at the heart of all this. They said over the weekend they spent 12 hours on the telephone to try and drum up support for Boris Johnson. I understand that Dan Rosenfeld, who is Chief of Staff, there's a lot of talk that he could be up for the chop after the Sue Gray report. He has been meeting MPs, he has been meeting ministers to test the atmosphere, and he has been making it clear that they are absolutely convinced that Boris Johnson will get through the Sue Gray report, and they have a big strategic plan of what they're going to do to get out of the other side. But what this person was saying is that, how do they know? There's a former cabinet minister who was given a very big assurance that they would all be fine, a previous Sue Gray report. Given that assurance by the cabinet secretary, Sue Gray refused to budge, and that was the end of that cabinet minister's career in government. So a lot of uncertainty there. As I was saying, the Boris Johnson side, they're absolutely convinced he's going to be okay. I was talking to one of his supporters, one of the people involved in this operation. They say 54 to get to those 54 letters. That's a very high number. It will be difficult. And another supporter said, this is all being caused by Dominic Cummings, and that vendetta is actually helping Boris Johnson.
Nick, thanks very much indeed. Well, joining me now, Delyth Miles, who's Membership Secretary of Grassroots Conservatives, and David Gauke, who served in Theresa May's cabinet and was an MP until 2019, and also Lord Marland, a former Conservative Party treasurer, a long-standing close ally of and one-time campaign manager for the Prime Minister. Good evening to you all. Lord Marland, first of all. You are in regular contact with Boris Johnson. When was the last contact and how did you advise him?
Well, I wouldn't say I was in regular contact, but it doesn't matter whether I'm in contact or not.
Well, I mean, you are a very close ally.
Well, I'm a huge fan of his. But I think that the overall point here is I think Conservative MPs have to be careful what they wish for, because the alternative is probably not thinkable in terms of Conservative MPs. I think people just need to stand back a bit. We've been through this incredible national and international crisis. We've had conditions like we've never known in our lives. And at the end of it, do we want to really pillory a man who's led us through that crisis and create turmoil within the country? I don't think that is the option. And I also don't think that, by the way, in contradiction to Nick, who I think is a brilliant journalist, I don't think the grassroots feel that they want to change.
And we'll be talking to a leader of the grassroots in a moment. But I'm just interested that you don't think anyone in the cabinet is either of sufficient merit or ready to take over the reins.
I think there are lots of people in the cabinet who are very eminent and able people. But do we want a crisis within the Conservative Party when we're trying to rebuild the country, when we're trying to cope with the cost of living crisis that's about to come about as a result of this crisis. And I think we just need to give a little bit of credit to the Prime Minister and say, you know, as when I travel the world, everyone says to me, gosh, Britain's done an incredible job coming out of this crisis. I think we need to give him a bit of credit. And I think we also ought to think about those civil servants who've been locked in number 10 for months, working for the benefit of the country, and then every now and then go out and have a drink. I think it's wrong, of course, but we can kind of understand
NHS workers have been working overtime and in hospitals and putting their families and...
Of course they have. And I know NHS workers, by the way, who have had a drink after a day's work.
If the Prime Minister has broken the rules, property's incredible, if the Prime Minister has broken the rules...
Yeah.
Then is his position tenable? Can you really have a Prime Minister that says one thing and does another?
The point there, Kirsty, is that Sue Gray, who I've known for a while, when I was a minister, she will leave no stone unturned. She is a brutal enemy. She will take no hostages. And I think let's wait and see what she says. And then we can determine whether it's right for the Prime Minister to resign, or we should have total schisms within the Conservative Party, the ruling party, which would be, in my view, disastrous at the moment.
Just before I turn to other guests, Oliver Wright in the Times is writing tomorrow that this was a man today in that interview, and I assume you watched the interview, that was clearly in despair.
Well, I think he's been under tremendous pressure. I mean, for heaven's sake, you know, what hours does that man work? What time and commitment has he put into this awful crisis? I'm not surprised he's completely knackered. He's also got a baby, and you know number 10 as well as I do. You wouldn't want to live there. It's the most oppressive place on earth.
Delyth Miles, just coming to you for a moment. You know, you've heard Nick talk about these letters going in, the possibility that almost 24 of the 2019 intake will follow. You lead the grassroots stories. What do you make of these MPs that are supposedly piling in so there is a vote of no confidence?
Incredibly disappointing. It's very difficult for me to follow Lord Marland in what he has said, because the poll that we carried out over the weekend, well, latter part of last week and over the weekend, with a very good response from our membership, over 2/3 or 68% were totally opposed to Boris Johnson resigning. And, you know, these are people who are committed to the Conservative Party, probably very likely to have been lifelong members and supporters and activists of the Conservative Party. Only 38% supported the vote of no confidence. So that's less than a third, really. There's a very clear message here to our backbenchers, you know, and if I was them, I would pause and think very, very carefully about what action they make.
But Delyth, I just want to ask you the same as I asked Lord Marland. Actually, does it matter to you then? Or does it matter to the grassroots if the Prime Minister has lied? Do you not care about that if it turns out to be the case?
Well, we've yet to have it proven that he has lied.
Of course. But I'm saying, look, it's coming soon, that decision.
Everybody's innocent until they're proven guilty. Yeah. What I'm commenting on, and our poll has sought from our membership, which is, you know, national membership, is what their views are on the current saga. So they're in total, you know, thing of the facts.
Right. Let me turn to David Gauke. Now, David Gauke, after the interview today, after the news from Nick tonight that at least 20 of the intake from 2019 are preparing to move, do you think we're approaching the end game?
It's possible. I mean, I don't know for sure. I had assumed until really today that probably the moment of danger was going to be after the May local elections, but there does seem to be a sense that things are moving very quickly now. I think the interview that the Prime Minister gave today has made his position significantly worse, because, you know, if the best argument that you have got to the accusation that you broke the rules was that, well, nobody had told me that the rules that I had imposed on everyone else were being broken, then I think that reveals you're in a difficult position. And I think the Prime Minister is in a difficult position because of his behaviour, because of the constant set of allegations that are being made. And I think Conservative MPs are increasingly uncomfortable with it, and it does appear that quite a number are now taking action.
You have been here before. I presume that if it happens, you don't want a repeat of the way that Theresa May left office.
No, and I mean, one of the reasons why I had previously thought that MPs might hold off until May putting in the confidence letters is that, perhaps at this point, the Prime Minister might have a better chance of surviving the vote. Whereas if it was after May and the results had been very bad for the Conservatives, then his position might be weakened even further. But as I say, momentum appears to be growing. There appears to be a growing sense amongst Conservative MPs, having spoken to their constituents and a lot of their activists. And I know that Conservative MPs have had very difficult conversations with senior members of their local associations saying, we're not prepared to campaign whilst Boris Johnson is there. And that, I think, has helped shift the mood.
So we have two views there. We have a view from the Grassroots who says actually overwhelmingly the Grassroots are for the Prime Minister, and David Gauke having a different experience there. You do accept that the party is split on this?
Well, look, I'm a huge fan of David's. I wish he was back in government. He's seen this as well as I have. We're in the middle of a midterm crisis. It's happened to every government since time immemorial. And it's really a factor of how you get out of this crisis. And I very much hope, and I think Delyth would agree, that what we want to see from the Prime Minister is him taking advantage of the Brexit dividend, which we haven't yet, that he gives us a pathway out of this crisis. But hang on, Kirsty, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I think we want a clear pathway of how he's going to come out of it. And I don't think you must underestimate him. He's a lucky general. He's a proven winner. He's been able to give us one of the biggest majorities the Conservative Party's ever had, despite critical voices. And I think as I said at the very beginning, Conservative MPs need to be careful what they wish for, because it could be a lot worse.
But is this the worst scrape he's been in? A scrape sounds...
Oh, he's been in a few scrapes, and I think you know that as well as I do. And he's pretty good at getting out of them, and I wouldn't underestimate him.
Thank you all very much indeed.